Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro reaffirmed his support for dialogue and diplomacy as means of building understanding between Caracas and Washington. COP30 focuses debates on socio-environmental justice with a view to finding concrete actions to strengthen the health of indigenous communities. And China launched military maneuvers in the Yellow Sea amid escalating tensions with Japan. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro reaffirmed his support for dialogue and diplomacy as means of building understanding between Venezuela and the United States. Venezuela's head of state, Nicolás Maduro, declared that the most powerful thing a leader can have is his word, in reference to the statements made by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, in which he considered holding talks with the leader of the Bolivarian nation. He also reaffirmed Venezuela's position of absolute respect for international law and its condemnation of the use of force to impose rules. The Venezuelan president also emphasized that it is only through dialogue that points of mutual interest should be sought.
I believe that the most powerful thing that a true political leader can have is the word. And the written word is there forever. You can see in this letter that I have here, Caracas, September 6th of 2025. This letter was delivered of 3 pages to the President of the U.S. on September the 6th. September, October, November, 9 weeks exactly it was delivered, and Venezuela has a position that hasn't changed of absolute respect to international law. We firmly question the threat of the use of force or the use of force to impose wars in the relationships between countries, and we ratify what is said by the UN Charter, what is said by our Constitution, what is said by our people. We ratify that only through diplomacy the free countries should understand themselves, the governments, and only through dialogue should they look for common points in subjects of interest to both parties.
And in this sense, President Nicolás Maduro reiterated that in the face of the lies of the U.S. government, the Venezuelan people will not be silenced and will continue to defend their truth.
Accuse us of total lies which are extravagant when the own organisms of U.S. intelligence for many years have affirmed the contrary to the lies that they say of Venezuela. We're not going to be silenced. This country will continue saying its truth in the streets, in the international forums, in the UN, in social media, in the communication media. Accused.
And Venezuelan Executive Vice President teleSUR Rodriguez met with the Council of Deputy Ministers of Hydrocarbons and PDVSA President Héctor Andrés Obregón to review the current state of the sector. Vice President Rodriguez highlighted the sustained growth of the oil, gas, and fuel sectors, which have contributed almost 17% to the growth of the national gross domestic product. She also announced the opening of new courses at the University of Hydrocarbons and criticized the United States' energy policy towards Venezuela, describing it as colonialist. teleSUR Rodriguez also reaffirmed the country's commitment to respecting international law and sustainable development. Casa de las Americas issued a statement warning about the growing U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean. It also expressed concern about the threats that put the stability of Venezuela and the region at risk. The organization denounced that Washington's objective is to overthrow the legitimate government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela at any cost. Meanwhile, U.S. Senator, as pathetic as he is dangerous, predicts that Maduro's days are numbered and that Venezuela, Colombia, and Cuba are part of a drug caliphate. The consequences of these actions and these threats could be catastrophic. Furthermore, they condemn the fascist behavior of those who celebrate the prelude to serious crimes, while some focus on the images of USS Gerald R. Ford as if it were a video game. Those of us who have experienced imperial aggression and violence firsthand condemn the preamble to a very serious crime and call for international solidarity with the peoples of the region. And on Monday, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel presided at the University of Havana a ceremony commemorating the 20th anniversary of Fidel Castro's historic speech. The ceremony was held in the main hall of the Study Center, where in 2005 the leader of the revolution had commemorated the 60th anniversary of his entry into the institution. The ceremony began with the traditional ringing of the university bell and the march of the guard to the mortuary mask of Julio Antonio Mella, founder of the Cuban student movement. The ceremony included a symbolic roll call dedicated to the martyrs of the University Student Federation, read by a young man from the main stage, and concluded by highlighting the responsibility that Cuban youth assume today in defending the country's social projects. And on Monday, Cuba's National Defense Council set out new guidelines to combine the recovery of the eastern provinces of the country hard hit by violent Hurricane Melissa with actions to adapt to climate change. From the Palace of Revolution in Havana, the capital of the island, led by President Nicolás Maduro, Miguel Díaz-Canel, and led by Prime Minister Manuel Marrero, the meeting was held 3 weeks after the violent cyclone passed. They analyzed the progress of the recovery work, and according to the detailed report, the Eastern Territory is showing progress in the restoration of the electrical system, water distribution, as well as mobile and fixed telephony. At the meeting, the authorities reviewed the assessment of damage to homes and the actions that continue to be taken. In provinces such as Granma, they are also analyzing transformative actions that will help to mitigate the impact of climate phenomena. Now, our first break coming up. Remember, you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The 30th United Nations Climate Conference focused its debates on social and environmental justice in the search for concrete actions to strengthen the health response of indigenous communities. The forum's agenda for Tuesday addresses the defense of indigenous rights in the heart of the Amazon and new climate narratives, on a day when Brazil will encourage decisive action and community participation. Meanwhile, the panel Indigenous Health in the Climate Agenda, Health, Territory, and Socio-Environmental Justice will examine how the lack of essential infrastructure aggravates the vulnerability of thousands of indigenous communities to climate change. The debates of this day are linked to the Belém Health Action Plan, a document that Brazil presented as a turning point in international climate policy. And Venezuela took part in the third high-level ministerial dialogue on climate finance at COP30 in Brazil. The Minister for Eco-Socialism, Ricardo Molina, called on global powers to provide more guidelines so that countries in the Global South can address the effects of climate change. He also mentioned that any effort related to climate financing must be unconditional, inclusive, and free from any ideology. He also emphasized that the lack of financing from the global north makes it difficult to implement solutions in vulnerable states, failing to comply with the mandates of the 2015 Paris Agreement. And after the People's Climate Summit ended on Sunday, thousands of indigenous people and social movement activists remain in Belém. Now they are working to get their voices heard inside of COP30. From the streets of Belém, our correspondent Brian Muir has more.
The People's Climate Summit, which brought over 30,000 representatives of social movements, indigenous nations, riverine community associations, and Quilombola residents to Belém for an alternative event to COP30, has come to an end. And since then, the social movements and indigenous peoples who are still here have been working to get their voices heard inside of COP30, an event which has been dominated so far by government representatives, northern NGOs and foundations, and lobbyists from industries like petroleum and mining who are pushing for green capitalism as a solution to the climate crisis. Yesterday, Brazil's Landless Rural Workers Movement, or MST, held an event inside of COP30 in the Jandaíra Pavilion in the Brazil area, in which they promoted agrarian reform as an effective strategy for the transformation to socialism, which they say is the only way to break the grips of the structural problems behind the climate crisis. Today, some of the people representing the People's Summit are going to hold a press conference inside of COP30 in which they present their demands that were raised during a democratic plenary session with thousands of participants to the international press. Meanwhile, yesterday, indigenous peoples held a large protest demanding more space inside of COP30. As Indigenous Rights Minister from Brazil, Sonia Guajajara, said in her closing statements at the People's Summit, this year there's 2 oil or petroleum lobbyists for every indigenous person inside the event. They want their voices heard. All of the international environmentalist groups are calling them stewards of the environment, but they say if they don't have sovereignty over their own lands, that role is really hard to perform.
On Monday, Colombian President Gustavo Petro once again referred to the military operation that took place in Guaviare on November 10th, where 7 miners died, assuming the responsibility and asked for forgiveness from the mothers. The president explained that Operation Oriel did not detect the presence of miners and that the bombing order against the dissidents of alias Ivan Mordisco was activated as soon as they detected a movement toward the north. Although under international humanitarian law, miners engaged in offensive action are excluded from the treatment of civilian population. The president nonetheless regretted the events and reiterated that this criminal organization, after destroying peace, uses forced recruitment of children as a war tactic. The head of state acknowledged that he will carry this death on his conscience for the rest of his life. On November 15, 2025, the Ministry of National Defense reaffirms its absolute commitment to protecting the rights of children and adolescents, as well as the entire civilian population within the national territory. This commitment guides the planning, execution, and evaluation of every operation carried out by the public forces throughout the national territory. On November 10th, our public forces carried out a military operation against the criminal structure organized armed group Residual Faction Mordisco. This action resulted in the elimination of 26 members of this organization responsible for extremely violent and systematic attacks. And on Tuesday, the final report on the Libra crypto scandal, which was prepared over 9 months by members of parliament from various opposition blocs, will be presented. Starting at 4 p.m. local time, the full text of the investigation will be released, along with evidence, testimonies, and expert reports detailing the flow of more than $120 million resulting from the scam promoted by President Milei on his social media accounts last February. Lawmakers are preparing a request to the Supreme Court for officials close to the Libertarian leader, including his sister Karina Milei, to finally appear before Parliament to testify. We have our second break right now. We invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Remember, you can also follow our live stories, live coverage, and follow the page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. We'll be right back. Welcome back. China began military maneuvers in the Yellow Sea amid escalating tensions with Japan. The naval maneuvers began after statements by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi about a possible attack on Beijing in the context of the situation in Taiwan. In this regard, the Chinese government specified that its live fire exercises in the Yellow Sea will last for 8 consecutive days, during which civil navigation will be prohibited. These actions are part of the Asian giant's defense of its One China policy. And on Tuesday, senior Japanese and Chinese diplomats held talks regarding comments Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae made about Taiwan earlier this month. Director General of the Department of Asian Affairs of the Chinese Foreign Ministry Liu Jingson held consultations with the Director General of the Japanese Foreign Ministry's Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, Kanai Masaki. No comments were made public after the meeting. Spokeswoman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry Mao Ning said that during the consultations, China urged Japan to withdraw the wrongful remarks made by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and stop creating trouble on China-related issues.
During the consultations, China once again lodged stern representations with Japan over Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's wrongful remarks regarding China. China and said Takaichi's fallacies seriously violated the international law and the basic norms governing international relations, seriously undermined the post-war international order, seriously violated the One China principle and the spirit of the 4 political documents between China and Japan, fundamentally undermined the political foundation of China-Japan relations, had extremely bad nature and influence, and stirred up public anger and condemnation among the Chinese people. China has earnestly urged Japan to withdraw its wrongful remarks, stop creating trouble on China-related issues, take concrete actions to admit mistakes and correct deviations, and safeguard the political foundation of China-Japan relations.
On the topics, President Vladimir Putin's office announced that Russia will not participate in Wednesday's meeting in Turkey between representatives of Ukraine and the United States. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov reiterated that Russia remains open to negotiations regarding the Ukrainian conflict. Among other reasons, the spokesperson stated that Moscow has not received any information about the meeting in Istanbul. He only explained that Kiev will have a meeting with the Turkish government, which he described as a friendly government to Russia, and that President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, will participate in that meeting. The senior official added that Russia will wait for the outcome of these negotiations. The United Nations Security Council approved the United States resolution to deploy an international stabilization force in the Gaza Strip. A resolution presented by the United States and based on Donald Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan was adopted with 13 votes in favor and 2 abstentions from Russia and China. The text authorizes the deployment of an international stabilization force, a coalition that would include Muslim-majority countries such as Indonesia and Azerbaijan to secure Gaza, oversee its demilitarization, protect civilians, and score humanitarian aid. It also establishes a transitional administration with international coordination and a trust fund backed by the World Bank to finance reconstruction. Western countries have described these measures as a first step toward a Palestinian state, although without defining its borders or the Palestinian right to self-defense. In this regard, the Hamas movement responded to the UN Security Council resolution saying that it does not meet the political and humanitarian demands or the rights of the Palestinian people, especially in the Gaza Strip. Hamas argues that the initiative seeks to achieve objectives that Israel did not accomplish through war and further separates Gaza from the rest of the Palestinian territories, attempting to impose a new reality that disregards Palestinian national rights. The resistance warned that assigning tasks such as disarming the resistance to an international force would strip it of neutrality and make it part of the conflict. Furthermore, it stressed that any international force should be limited to operating at the border, supervising the ceasefire under full UN authority and in exclusive coordination with Palestinian official institutions. Russia and China denounced the lack of transparency in the resolution approved by the United Nations Security Council for Gaza and rejected the ongoing colonial practices. They affirmed that the organization supports an initiative based on the commitment of Washington, which has demonstrated opacity, ineffectiveness, and irresponsibility in this and several other conflicts. Chinese Representative Fu Quan reiterated that the agreement is vague and does not clarify critical elements, while Vasily Nebensia, his Russian counterpart, questioned the fact that none of the countries supplying weapons to Zionism have committed to demilitarization of the Palestinian enclave. Palestinian authorities denounced that Israeli occupation forces stole more than 17,000 objects from the Pasha's palace in Gaza. Those responsible for restoring the palace indicated that the Israeli army removed all the pieces while deliberately destroying the site. However, they were able to recover 20 items after the excavations. The museum was noted for housing numerous objects of great value, including relics from the Mamluk, Ottoman, Byzantine, Roman, and prehistoric periods. This site is one of more than 110 archaeological sites in Gaza that were looted during the Israeli regime's siege. We have come to the end of this news, but if you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thanks for watching.